If you've ever driven across the country, you know that endless stretch of highway where there's nothing but open road, flickering billboards, and silence pressing against your car windows. That's where my nightmare began. I was on a solo road trip from Denver to Los Angeles, chasing the idea of adventure and freedom. By the time I crossed into Utah, the sun had already disappeared, leaving behind a blood-red horizon that quickly bled into black. My GPS had no signal, and the gas gauge on my old Honda Civic hovered dangerously close to empty. I told myself I'd stop at the next town, the next gas station, the next motel. But for nearly an hour, nothing appeared. Just desert, shadows, and the sound of my own tires chewing at the asphalt. Then, like a mirage, a neon sign flickered in the distance. A glowing blue vacancy that seemed to float above the emptiness. I almost laughed in relief. I pulled off the highway and followed the cracked driveway up to a squat, single-story building. The parking lot was half empty, the only other cars covered in dust like they hadn't moved in days. The paint on the motel walls peeled away in long strips, and one of the lights over the office door buzzed, threatening to die. Still, it was shelter. It was safety. Or so I thought. Inside the office, the air smelled faintly of mold and something metallic. Behind the counter sat an older man with hollow cheeks and watery eyes that seemed to study me for longer than necessary. He didn't greet me at first, just stared, his lips twitching like he was deciding whether to speak. Finally, he rasped, "Looking for a room?" "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just for the night." He slid an old-fashioned ledger across the counter instead of asking for my ID. The pages were yellowed, filled with names written in fading ink. I signed my name quickly, my hands shaking from exhaustion, and handed the book back. He pushed a brass key toward me. Not a key card. An actual key with the number 6 scratched into its tag. "Stay inside after midnight," he said, his eyes sharp now. "Don't open the door for anyone." I forced a smile, thinking it was just some weird local joke. Right. Got it. The hallway to my room smelled like mildew and something sweet like rotting fruit. The carpet squished under my shoes as if it hadn't dried from some long-forgotten flood. When I unlocked room 6, I noticed how heavy the door felt, like it didn't want to open. Inside, the decor looked frozen in the 70s. Yellowed wallpaper, a buzzing lamp on the nightstand, and a bedspread patterned with faded flowers. The bathroom tiles were cracked, and the mirror above the sink was spotted with rust. But I was too tired to care. I tossed my backpack on the chair, locked the door, and stretched out on the bed. That's when I heard it. A knock. Soft. Barely audible. Like fingertips brushing against wood. I glanced at the clock. 12:17 a.m. I froze, remembering the old man's warning, "Don't open the door for anyone." The knock came again. Louder this time. I sat up, my heart racing. "Who is it?" I called. No answer. Silence pressed in on me. I reached for my phone, but of course there was no service. The Wi-Fi network the motel claimed to have didn't show up either. Then came the whisper. Oh, drawn out. Right outside the door. "Let me in." I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my backpack. My mouth went dry and every instinct screamed to stay quiet. But I whispered back, "Go away." The whisper turned into scratching. Nails dragging down the wood, slow and deliberate. I wanted to believe it was some drunk guest, maybe a prank. But the sound wasn't human. The nails scraped too deep, too long like claws. The scratching stopped. I thought maybe it was over. Until I heard the breathing. Shallow. What? Right outside the door. I couldn't take it anymore. I shoved a chair under the doorknob and sat on the bed, clutching the heavy lamp like a weapon. For nearly an hour the breathing stayed. Sometimes it shifted closer to the peephole. Sometimes it moved toward the window. But it never left. Around 3 a.m., everything went silent. I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the dark, waiting for morning. When the sunlight finally bled through the blinds, I dared to pull the chair away and crack open the door. The hallway was empty. But the door itself told a different story. Long, jagged scratch marks crisscrossed the wood, deep enough to splinter it. My stomach turned as I noticed something dark crusted into the grooves. Dried blood. I didn't even bother checking out. I grabbed my bag, sprinted to my car, and peeled out of the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, I saw the old man standing outside the office watching me leave. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. Just stared. Back on the highway, my hands shook against the steering wheel. I told myself I'd never talk about it, that maybe I imagined everything. But as I drove farther away, I realized something that made my blood run cold. When I signed that ledger, I had skimmed over the other names. Dozens of them, some barely legible. But one detail burned into my mind. The last entry before mine had been dated almost 20 years ago. And next to my name, written in the old man's shaky handwriting, were the words, Room 6 Last Stay. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying tales. If you've ever driven through Nevada, you might have heard of Highway 50. They call it the loneliest road in America. And trust me, it earns that name. Hundreds of miles stretch through desert and mountains with almost no towns, no gas stations, no cell service. Just you, the road, and the shadows. I drove that highway last summer, moving across the country for a new job. I'd planned it carefully, stocking up on snacks, water, and a full tank of gas before leaving Fallon. My goal was to make it to Ely before nightfall. But as anyone who's ever taken that road knows, plans don't always work out there. The sun dipped low, staining the sky orange and purple, and the isolation began to sink in. No cars passed me going either way. The two-lane blacktop stretched forever, vanishing into the horizon. I turned up the radio to break the silence, but static swallowed every channel. That's when I saw him. A man standing on the side of the road, his thumb sticking out, the classic hitchhiker pose. At first, I thought it was a mirage, the way the desert heat bends light. But as I got closer, the figure sharpened into reality. A tall man in a dusty jacket, jeans, and boots. He didn't have any bags with him. Just stood there rigid like he'd been waiting. I slowed down. I shouldn't have. Every warning voice in my head screamed not to. But loneliness and exhaustion messed with my judgment. I told myself it was the decent thing to do. People break down on this road all the time, right? I pulled over, gravel crunching beneath my tires. The man walked up to the passenger side window. Up close he looked wrong. His face was pale, almost gray, like he hadn't seen the sun in years. His eyes were deep-set, dark, and too still, as if they weren't blinking enough. Headed east. His voice was flat, calm, almost rehearsed. Yeah, I said, trying to sound casual. He nodded once and opened the door without waiting for me to invite him. He slid into the seat, moving stiffly like every joint in his body ached. I noticed his clothes were clean, too clean. No dust, no sweat, no signs he'd been walking through the desert. I pulled back onto the highway, my heart thumping harder than it should have. The man stared straight ahead, his hands folded neatly in his lap. What's your name? I asked, just to fill the silence. He turned his head slowly toward me, his lips curling into the faintest smile. Names aren't important. The way he said it chilled me. For the next 20 miles he didn't say another word. He just sat there, eyes fixed on the horizon as the desert night swallowed us whole. The temperature dropped and I shivered despite the heater running. Something about the air inside the car felt wrong, too heavy, too cold. Then he spoke again. You shouldn't stop for people out here. My grip on the wheel tightened. Why not? Because some of us never leave. I swallowed hard, trying to laugh it off. What do you mean? He didn't answer. Just kept smiling, that thin, unsettling smile. A mile later he finally turned his head toward me. His eyes gleamed unnaturally in the dim dashboard light. Do you believe in ghosts? Every hair on my body stood up. My first instinct was to pull over and kick him out, but the road was endless and black, and I couldn't imagine stopping in that emptiness. I forced a shaky laugh. Not really. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You should. Suddenly the radio, silent for hours, crackled to life. A voice hissed through the static, distorted and broken, but I caught fragments. Get out, don't belong. The man didn't react. He just leaned back, folded his hands again and stared straight ahead. I tried to steady my breathing, but panic clawed at me. Something about this hitchhiker wasn't human. After what felt like forever, I saw the faint glow of Ely in the distance. Relief washed over me. I told myself I'd drop him at the first gas station no matter what. But when I turned to tell him, the seat beside me was empty. My stomach dropped. I swerved, nearly losing control of the car. The door was still closed. The seatbelt was still fastened. But he was gone. I pulled into the first lit gas station, shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. I stumbled out of the car, breathing like I'd run a marathon. A man at the pump gave me a strange look. You okay, buddy? He asked. I nodded quickly, trying to compose myself. Yeah. Just a long drive. I glanced back at my car, and that's when I saw it. The passenger side window was fogged up from the inside. And drawn in the condensation was a single word, written with a finger, stay. I never drove Highway 50 alone again. There's something eerie about overnight trains. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks, the dim lights, the faces of strangers who share your journey for just a few fleeting hours. You're trapped together in that metal tube, moving through darkness, surrounded by nothing but the unknown. I learned that the hard way when I backpacked across Europe a few years ago. It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, cheap hostels, new cities, and trains carrying me from one country to the next. But there's one trip I'll never forget. One that still haunts me. I had boarded an overnight train from Prague to Budapest. The train was older, its compartments lined with worn seats, squeaky doors, and windows that fogged over with every breath. Most passengers were already asleep when I found my compartment. Inside sat 3 people: a young woman with curly hair buried in a book, a middle-aged man snoring softly, and another backpacker around my age who gave me a friendly nod. "Long ride," he said with a faint British accent. "Yeah," I replied, tossing my bag onto the overhead rack. "At least we'll save on a night's hostel." He chuckled and we started talking. His name was Daniel. He was traveling alone too, making his way across Eastern Europe before starting university back home. We swapped stories about sketchy hostels, missed trains, and the thrill of being free on the road. As the train rocked us deeper into the night, the others in the compartment drifted off. But Daniel and I kept talking quietly. Eventually I started to doze, the rhythmic sound of the tracks lulling me. Then I woke up. The compartment was cold, colder than it should have been. The lights in the hallway flickered weakly through the glass door. I glanced around, disoriented. The young woman was still asleep, her book resting on her chest. The middle-aged man was slumped forward, snoring. But Daniel's seat was empty. At first I thought he'd gone to the restroom. But 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The train kept rattling along through the dark countryside, no stations in sight. Finally I stood and slid the compartment door open. The hallway was empty. A few other passengers stirred behind their doors, but no one was moving around. I walked the length of the car, checked the restroom. Empty. My chest tightened. Where the hell could he have gone? I went back to the compartment, trying not to panic. Maybe he'd wandered farther down the train. I told myself I'd check again in a bit. But when I sat back down, I noticed something strange. His backpack was gone. Not just missing from the rack, gone like it had never been there. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if exhaustion was playing tricks. But I remembered him putting it up there. I remembered the scuffed red straps. I remembered it clearly. The train conductor came by an hour later to check tickets. I asked him if he'd seen another young traveler, British, short brown hair, about my age. The conductor frowned. "No," he said firmly. "This compartment only 3 passengers." I shook my head. "No, there were 4 of us. Me, the woman, the older man, and the other backpacker, Daniel." But the conductor only looked more confused. "Sir, I saw you board. There was no one else." I tried to argue, but he waved me off and moved on. That's when I noticed the young woman watching me. Her expression was unreadable. Finally she said softly, "Who are you talking about?" "Daniel," I said quickly. "The guy sitting next to me. We were talking for hours." Her brow furrowed. "You've been alone since you boarded?" "No one sat there." My mouth went dry. I turned to the older man, but he just snored on, oblivious. I sat there in silence, heart hammering as the train rattled through the night. Was I losing my mind? Had I dreamed the entire conversation? No. I remembered his laugh, his accent, the way he'd shared his plans. I remembered. The rest of the ride was torture. Every time the train stopped at a tiny, dimly lit station, I half expected him to reappear. But he never did. When we finally arrived in Budapest, I stumbled off the train, desperate for fresh air. The platform was crowded with travelers, vendors, locals rushing past. But above the noise I froze. Someone was calling my name. I turned. And there he was, Daniel. Standing at the far end of the platform, his backpack slung over one shoulder, smiling faintly like nothing was wrong. "Hey!" I shouted, pushing through the crowd. "Where the hell did you go?" But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. His face, it wasn't right. Too pale. Too thin. His eyes were dark pits, and his smile stretched unnaturally wide. He raised one hand in a slow wave. Then, as a train pulled between us, he vanished. Gone. I searched the platform for an hour, but he never came back. Nobody had seen him. Not the conductors, not the passengers, not the staff at the station. Later, at my hostel, I mentioned it to the receptionist, an older Hungarian woman. The moment I described him, her face darkened. "You met him," she said flatly. I frowned. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer, her voice low. There is a story, old story. A young traveler who died on that line many years ago. He boarded the train alone. No one saw him after. Some say he still rides looking for company. But he always disappears before morning. My blood turned to ice. I never saw Daniel again. But even now, whenever I ride a train at night, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, waiting for the next lonely traveler to sit across from him. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying tales.